I had to leave LA. Some mangled starlet in a cocktail dress glued to the step and repeat. I exist, I exist, I exist. She cries desperately into a vodka soda lime. Lime, not lemon. Less calories.
How are you?
Hey, how you doing? Hey,
Con-
Tom. Good to see you again.
nice to see you too. Congratulations on the book.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm happy to have been able to come around on the show twice for a book. That makes me feel like a local in some way.
Yeah, you know what? You're one of the cast of characters. You'll be an executive
Yeah,
producer soon.
yeah.
How's the response been so far?
Well, I mean, I got the chance to read at the Strand last night in New York City, and that was a book launch is very weird, especially in the climate, post a COVID world, and just as technology has sort of gobbled up all of our reality. Realistically, the time we spend the most time inside of the internet. It feels like, as opposed to like in our physical world. And so it's made book releases and just releases for art in general quite odd. And so you have to sort of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like fire your own confetti cannon in a way, in order to feel something substantive when you put out some art. Because I feel like I'm the kind of person that if it's happening on the internet, it doesn't really affect my personhood. Like I can't, I don't internalize it. But when I was reading at the Strand, 150 people sold out
Yeah,
show,
yeah.
and receiving that, it felt like a like a thing was actually occurring. You know what I mean?
I mean, you said it very well there, that we have this sort of ephemeral relationship to the things that we like or love or take in, but when we're around the thing in person, we haven't yet lost that. That's a distinct and beautiful experience. However, this is a personal thing. I mean, as it was your last book, a personal thing to get out to these people and to the world. So I'll start by asking, what made you want to put a collection like this out into the world at all?
It started with a TikTok. I was somewhere between bored and frustrated.
That's where I
Um,
always live, by the way.
yeah, where I
yeah,
almost constantly
yeah,
live.
that's where I rent.
Yeah, and rent is expensive. Um, and I was like, I was just posting garbage online, as we do to pass the time in this world. And one of the garbage things I posted was this TikTok about me, about my time on this show, and how it was like this sort of funny TikTok about how I don't remember a lot of the stuff that people remember from the show because I was out partying. And for clarification, that it became like 50 million people saw that, 50,000 comments. It was news pickup, because I think everyone thought they were getting like some sort of scoop about disorderly conduct and drinking on set. Realistically, I was a college kid in LA by myself for reasons that the book explores, and just individuation and manhood, and my life was starting, and I was out a lot, and I was having this sort of dual experience of shooting this teen show, this kid show, and also having this sort of exploratory sort of nightlife existence. And those two things are like trying to coalesce those two very disparate experiences. And I was mostly, when I put the TikTok out, I was like, oh, it's meaningless as everything is. But it got a lot of response, and so it started me on the journey of being like, well, I've been writing poetry since I was like 15 years old, and a lot of that poetry was about my frustrations, about being on a show that I don't think really represented me creatively, and I was trying to find meaning while doing it. So I was a very serious kid, um, and so and so I just started collecting poems, and I wrote some new poems that are more reflective about my time during my time at that portion of my life.
It's really interesting. I was hoping you might read a little bit of it before we talk more about
Sure.
it, just so
Yeah.
people get an idea of what we were talking about. What's the first poem you're going to read for us today?
The first poem I'm going to read is called "Sex Joke During a J14 Interview."
J14, like the is a magazine, right?
Yeah, it was like a teen magazine of a lot of pop. It was like what you read when you went to the grocery store with
Yeah,
your
like
mom.
Tiger Beat or 16 or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like that. Okay, I got
exactly.
you. I got you.
Sex joke during the J14 interview. Two types of kids get into acting on children's television: church kids and tiny little freaks. Go ahead and guess which one I was. Church kids are good because they're amazing singers and they're great at doing what they're told. And because they learn scripture, they can recite whatever garbage shit these shows throw at them. Then there was us, the tiny little freaks. The advantage that we had on the church kids is that we had that spark, the X factor. The X factor here being the early stages of some form of mental illness. We seem to go one of two ways. Either we get bored and decide that we can use our superpowers for more rewarding things, or we completely implode, becoming drug-addled messes. I did the former. I'd say mostly because I was lucky that my parents weren't fuck-ups. It was funny watching the church kids and the tiny little freaks interact. The terse, controlled laughter of a church kid as a tiny little freak makes a wildly inappropriate sex joke during the J14 interview. Anyway, this is less of a poem and more of an observation.
I want to point out that anyway, this is less of a poem and more of an observation is a line in the poem from Avan Jogia from his new collection, Autopsy.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about that poem.
I think that a lot of it started off as just sort of this musing about like how, because I was sort of a switched on kid. Like I don't think I mean, even before I was maturated by professionalism, and having to be a person who worked a job that, a very serious job,
Yeah.
which is shooting a show.
Yeah.
At a very young age, I was always just a serious or a mature kid, or I was a little bit. I was never really adolescent that long.
You were you were sort of right from childhood right to like middle management. You went from like childhood to like
absolutely.
yes,
I was
a severe serious kid. I understand.
Yeah, I was a serious kid, and I think that I was the absurdity of the I would say cosplay or drag performance of adolescence and purity that being on a children's television show requires you to do. It's like a drag act. You're like, I'm a virgin and I never drank a thing in my life. And, that's the sort of context. So these interviews were just so absurd to me. They were like, and also the questions were just nauseatingly simple. And I think, and now I think sort of maybe even a little bit more sinister than, as I think, what's your boy's favorite color? Like as a question is not really like a great question to answer, but I think it's just boring. But I think now that I look back at those magazines, I think that they were setting up young women to see boys as sort of these fantasy creatures that are unknowable and ununderstandable and that need to be conquered with doing everything perfect the way that they want it to, so you can sort of trick them into liking you. I think it like sets up a sort of deep insecurity that I'm uncomfortable with, and I was uncomfortable with at the time. So I think this is just mostly an observation of me looking back at a time in my life where I was like, at the time, I thought it was weird, and especially as an adult, as an older man, I think it's weird.
I want to set up sort of the expectation versus the reality. So
Sure.
when you were 17 and you dropped out of school in BC
Yeah.
to move to LA, what was the dream then?
Well, I was like I said, a serious kid. I think that now that I look back on my life, I think that I just wanted to be in movies. I wanted to work in films. And when you're a 17-year-old kid, they don't let you write and direct films. It's just they just don't let you. So the only way you can interact with the medium is to be an actor. That's how you can serve. That's the need that is required of you as a 17-year-old. So I started acting, and I loved acting, and I still do to this day love acting. I think the goal was to go down to LA, and I noticed that a lot of shows hired Canadians, but that shoot in Vancouver, but they never hired Canadians out of Vancouver. They would always hire Canadians out of LA and have them, come up. So I just went down there with the idea that I'd get a show that would shoot up back and up in Vancouver. And of course, I got this big American show. My first show, was Victorious, and I was this. It was this. I was an American actor, and I was down in America, and it was a different world entirely, a different medium. I'd never done multi-camera. I almost got fired the first year that I was on the show
Because you were so bad?
because I didn't have the rhythm. I was doing mumbly, sort of introspective acting, and I wasn't doing the bit. And the bit is it's really specific as a style of acting. It's a specific medium that you have to know. It's like music. It's not even really like acting.
Yeah, that Nickelodeon sort of ba-da 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 rhythm.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
yeah,
Laugh
yeah.
track, hit this rhythm. It's very tonal.
I have a sort of broad question, and I wonder if it's a broad question that defines a lot of your thinking these days. So bear with me here.
Listen, I'm on your ride.
Thank you very much. So you end up working on Victorious right
Yep.
away. Your character was this sort of charming bad boy character, and quickly, and you write about this in the book, you become this major teen heartthrob. Broadly, how does that role shape how people saw you and even see you today?
Well, I think it sets you up in a very certain way, eh, unattainable, and part of being like a teen idol is being sort of shapeless as a person and not really having that strong an identity, so that people can telegraph onto you what their fantasies
Yeah,
of you and how you will be, uh, which make them happy, you know?
yeah,
So there's really a sort of desire for the hot guy, quote unquote hot guy, to just be to be a non-person. Um, and so I feel like it set me up. I think most people when they meet me, they're surprised I'm such a yapper, you know, because it was like you get sort of framed as a sort of strong silent type, and I think just generally like I had the very good fortune of not being big enough a teen star that it was so encompassing, all encompassing, I should say, like the Zac Efrons and the Justin Biebers. I was a participant of my class, but I was away from it enough that I was allowed to be an observer. And I think that distinction is what allowed me to write books and really be critical of what it is, because I never was caught up in it because I wasn't big enough as a star and a teen heartthrob in that way to like lose my personhood, you
yeah.
know?
Right. Yeah, at that level, the Zac Efron Bieberian level, you're in a dome. Like you're just your entire life. You're
Yeah,
just swimming in
it's
this
like
ocean of fame, and you had a little bit
yeah,
of
it's like
remove from it.
this high clouded delusion of fame, and that really just like that really well-meaning people get lose their way in, you know?
So my understanding is you went back and looked at some teen magazines when you were writing this collection. What struck you the most when you were looking through them?
Just again the sort of fetishization of the mystery that is the young boy, um, and selling that mystery to young women and or young girls, I should say, and sort of the and how I think that's must be it's so damaging the way that like it made the idea of boys as this sort of unknowable and unseeable and attainable thing, and I think really messes with the insecurities of young women.
Um, I think I said this in the introduction that I think there's a certain amount of like when we were reading these books growing up, there is a part of you that goes, oh, wouldn't it be nice to be that? Like, oh,
Of course,
that
there's an
seems nice.
idol
Yeah,
worship.
yeah, yeah. Or like that sounds
How about
good.
this as context, Tom? I would have liked to be that.
Oh, when you were a kid, you would have wanted to have been that too.
No, as I was doing it, quite literally, I would have liked to have been the thing that I was told that they told everyone that I was, which is cool, confident, like has the answer, is
Oh,
the guy.
that's
But
so
that's the thing is,
interesting.
it's a removing of the humanity. How about this? Like a guy who is on the cover of those magazines can have a mother who is having cancer or has cancer or has can have in other contexts is not my own, but other contexts can't have abusive parents, can't come from poverty. You represent a comfort and a perfect thing,
Yeah, you're a
not just
product.
for
You're a
yourself,
brand.
for people. Yeah. And it's more important than just the sort of commodification of a company trying to make money off something. There's also a real human emotional element. Like the show, the thing I'm proudest about when it comes to the show is that we were able to, if you had a really hard home life and you're getting bullied at school, you could come and switch on the TV for half hour and everything would be perfect. All your friends would be nice to you, and every parent on the show is lovely. And it's a fantasy and it doesn't represent real life. And I think that's important. I wasn't like, I've just never, being a part of that fantasy has been hard for me.
There's a moment in the poem where you sort of, I don't know, it struck me as a sort of sad moment where you're sort of aware of it while it's happening. So in the very first poem in the book, you say, I awoke into consciousness midway through my life, having already decided in my youthful arrogance on the direction my life would take without first consulting my future.
Mm,
Tell me a
yeah.
little bit more. I was really struck by that line. Tell me about that line.
I think that when you are young and driven, the way that I was, and the way that a lot of the kids I think that, it's such a hard job. There's very few of us that didn't actually want it or want a version of it and not understand. Like it's just too hard a job. You work 12 hours, you fly to London to do promo every other, month. You're at the Mall of America signing autographs for thousands of kids. It's just too hard a job that I very a lot of the kids who were on the show wanted it, like massive air quotes, because it is sort of an all-encompassing umbrella thing, right? And I think as a young person, I wanted it, which was to, I don't know, to be able to ultimately just be able to create and be professional and matter and be relied upon. I think that was a big part of it too, is just I liked being relied upon to do a job. I liked the seriousness of it. But I think that like I didn't consult my future in the regard that I don't I think that the because it's your first time laying any of the brickwork down, and you sort of don't know the shape of the house yet. You don't know what building you're building yet, and so you're just laying bricks in this sort of rectangular shape. And you're like, I don't know where the bathroom's going. I don't know what I want my future house to look like. I don't know what I want my future work to look like.
What's the one thing you wish someone? Kurt Cobain used to say that there's no school for being famous. You don't get to go to school for being famous. Given what you told me, what's the one thing you wish someone had told you about being famous?
I wish I'd accepted what was going on a little bit more because I think I pushed back a little bit early. I think I wish I had accepted that, okay, you're the teen heartthrob idol guy. And that means that this is what's true of that. You got to do this, you got to do that. You got to do some romantic movies and stuff like that. It's just part of it. And I so immediately after that show was so decidedly wanted nothing to do with that part of my life that I think that I sort of did not avail myself to certain steps that now that I'm 33, I just didn't realize how much time there was on the clock because like I said, at 33, I've completely changed my entire like who I am as a person and how people even see me through directing films and writing books and stuff like that. So yeah, I just wish I had known that like you don't have to like try to escape this immediately. You can go just in like sort of actually just do that, do it, do that a little bit more, and then you can get rid of it later.
Yeah, it
Um,
sounds like it was painful, but you didn't necessarily need to suffer. Like you could have just gone away with it and without having like it was painful, but you could have dealt with the pain. You didn't have to suffer through it.
yes, I chose to suffer, and I think I sort of was like oppositional defiant and I just have that natural tendency, and I think I was just like sort of like acting that out, in a weird way.
Well, speaking of the defiance, and I need to ask you about this. The piece towards the end of your collection is called "I Am on Set Getting Yelled At." I'm
Yeah.
just going to put the boat in the water, Evan, and I'll let you row it. Tell me what that. I was obviously struck by it. Tell me what that piece is about.
It's about an experience that I had on the set of the show when I was 17 or 18, and it was the moment that I realized that I was now that I look back at it as an adult, it was the moment I realized I was actually a kid because I think all of my choices and the things that I did are not dissimilar to who I would be now. But the difference is somebody, if that was happening to me as an adult, um, my response, the idea of being like sort of chastised for not being able to perform, um, I think what I would have done is I wouldn't have been shaking with the adolescent anger. I just would have so clearly been known that despite my inability to do the thing that I been quote unquote paid to do, I would have just been able to stand my ground a little bit more. And so when I look back at that poem, I see the first I see now the first time I'm like, oh, of all the events during that, I was actually a child then, um, in that moment.
I think that's a powerful revelation. I think that when you're like, I think that what you're talking about is getting, yelled at by someone on set, someone with some power on set. And at the time, you're thinking, I'm so grown up.
Yeah.
I'm an adult. I'm an actor. Like you said, I'm a very serious kid. And I think there's
I felt
something,
that the whole time. It's like this maturation thing. I was like, I was mature the whole
yeah.
time, I thought in my head.
And I think there's something so powerful about looking back and you being 17 years old and imagining being in the street and watching a 17-year-old getting yelled at like that. And you feel like you just want to hold on to your 17-year-old self and go like, you were a
yeah,
baby, like you were a
yeah,
kid, you know?
yeah. And I feel like, it's confusing, right? Because we were talked to like adults because a lot of us were very mature. And all of us were, we could communicate in a mature way. I don't think the way that I speak right now is very different than the way that I spoke as a 17-year-old kid.
Right, right.
That's confusing, I think, to an
Yeah,
adult.
right. I understand.
I was always like this. And so then I feel like there's this thing that look, I can talk to them. So why aren't you getting this? Like, this sort of frustration of like, why are you being a child when I know you to be someone who talks like an adult? And so it's obviously it's a failing. It's an understandable failing, but it's a failing of the people who are actually adults to not recognize that these are still children. But I also in that story, I also thank him because I don't think that I mean like all this is not like self sympathy. I don't like poetry that's self sympathy. I certainly don't like looking back at the time with self sympathy. It absolutely radically changed my life for the better as far as what it's done to me. And even that moment, and I say it in the poem, I that made me a better professional. So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, it's really hard to do what we do. It's high pressure, and it should be. There's no way to make it. It doesn't get better if it's like I'm really for the movement towards us being less hard on each other and the sort of like I would say empathy movement that has happened in the last 5 years. But there is some jobs that um, are just really high stress and high energy, and the only people who can hack it are the ones who can hack it.
But again, I want to say that you were kids here, and
Oh, absolutely. I still think it's wrong, but I think
yeah.
it prepped me for like what was coming in my 20s and 30s.
Listen, I'm trying to balance between not wanting you to talk about anything you don't want to talk about and also not robbing you of the ability to say something you want to say. Like that's the tension I'm feeling right now, if you can kind of see it
Sure.
on my face. But like, I don't know, man, it was really hard to read that poem and not think about the documentary series I watched. What was it called? The Quiet on Set, about Dan Schneider and about everything that went on, the volatile set that he made on the set of Victorious. And I mean, I just want to put the boat in the water. Am I on to something reading that poem?
What I've sort of noticed through this experience, through all these people who have shared their stories about that time in their lives,
Yeah.
and myself included, is that there is. I think that's what I was sort of alluding to with my last statement about the two truths being true. It's true that I was as a kid should not be chastised on set to that degree,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also true that it's a high pressure job, and in order to do this long term, you have to be able to do it. You have to be able to perform at the highest level. Part of me getting older is also radically accepting all the other truths that are out there about a situation at a time. I know there's kids who walked away from that situation having had a completely different experience than mine. Some of them way better. Some of them demonstrably worse. You know what I mean? And so I hold a lot of respect for all of the versions of a thing. And I think also just to as a sort of to piggyback on that, I think that there's sort of a mock sympathy, especially around documentaries like Quiet on Set or it's sort of it's ambulance chasing and tragedy porn masquerading as sympathy. I think all public interest, I'm very distrustful of public interest about this subject because I think it's clickbaity and it's for media outlets and studios to make money. And I don't think the sympathy that they're getting from the audience is real. I think it's sort of a perverse,
Oh,
like car crash washing.
I understand. Like it's set. You're saying that it's set up in a way that like, look at this awful thing that happened to these kids, but hey, people are making money off this, and you're not watching this only going, oh, you're watching this going
No,
like,
you're not.
wow, oh,
Wow,
wow,
it's
yeah.
titillating, and I think what it is, it's further exploitation.
Oh, that's. I mean, I could start talking to you about my feelings on true crime, and we could be here all day. I want to ask you a question, and then I want you to read one more poem.
Cool.
People who are listening to this who are picking up now might think that, oh, you wrote a memoir, you wrote a novel, you wrote something about this. How has poetry as a form helped you unpack what you've experienced in
I
Hollywood and in
think
this
it's to
world?
me, poetry is the most direct artistic impulse that I have in my wheelhouse of impulses. Directing a film takes a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of people. Acting requires a gig. It's cathartic, but you're also saying other people's words. So you might be able to get something off that you need to get off emotionally, but it's you're saying other people's words. Painting, it's messy, a lot of paint.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
that's the problem with paint is the
that's the
cleanup.
problem with
Yeah,
painting.
I
It's messy.
understand. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
But writing is one of the most immediate impulses that I have. I can be walking down the street and someone crosses me in traffic and they remind me of a person that I knew from high school, and that got me thinking about something. And I'm able to immediately write down a line, and then 4 hours later, when I'm on the train, I can finish up that line, and I can work on ideas as they come to me in immediate. I need no one else's help and I can deliver it instantaneously. And I usually think of art as I have a question I need to ask myself and maybe ask the audience. And then I filter it through these different, I filter it through, okay, is it a movie? Now, this is not really a movie. That's not the best way to talk about this idea. Is it a book? Is it, I try to figure out where that idea or that question fits in best. And then so for as an impulse, it's the most immediate for me.
And I understand poetry is such a direct emotional impulse that even in the short verse, I would feel the sort of direct emotional punch of what you were going through. And let's give people an example before we go. So you're going to read the Last Supper. I'll be selfish and say that I'm sort of pleased that you're reading this one.
Okay, good.
Would you mind setting it up and tell us a little bit about it before you read it?
It's called The Last Supper. I lived in Los Angeles on and off for the last 12 years, much to my dismay. And it's a city that I have a very complicated relationship with, a lot of love, but also as as the consummate observer or investigator, I have trouble not seeing its warts and all. So this is
Right.
a poem about that.
Okay.
The Last Supper. I had to leave LA. The spray of crazy and luxury sweatpants. I had to leave LA. The boys in their black-faced Rolexes and their Teslas and their Dries Von Norton bomber jackets, the always 32 crowd hunting and stalking the next crop of 18-year-old Midwestern models. I had to leave LA. Some mangled starlet in a cocktail dress glued to the step and repeat. I exist, I exist, I exist. She cries desperately into a vodka soda lime. Lime, not lemon. Less calories. I had to leave LA. The fraud artist. Daddy is a partner at the big agency, and his friend owns the gallery. Got a studio downtown. Sketchy downtown? Because he can afford to take risks with his daddy's money, because he can choose to be broke and struggle. I had to leave LA. Because if I stay here any longer, they will find a place for me. Eventually, they find a place for you, some sinner's seat at that sick table, the Last Supper. LA is everywhere now, pouring out of the telephone, shining out of a screen. I thought I could leave LA. LA lives in my pocket now.
That was Avan Jogia reading The Last Supper from his new book, Autopsy of an Ex-Teen Heartthrob. Avan, thanks so much for joining us today. I love getting a chance to talk to you.
Always. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate you.